everyone, it's Mary Brownlee, licensed professional counselor and trauma therapist. Today we're going to go over the wound of abandonment, specifically as it applies to borderline personality individuals. This video will also be helpful if maybe you don't have a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, but maybe you have lots of childhood trauma and you also have a wound related to abandonment and the fear of like loss and people not loving you. This video can be helpful also just in a general sense if you have a wound of abandonment, which definitely happens to a lot of us who have childhood trauma. But more importantly, for those with borderline personality disorder, this video will be really helpful because we're going to be using IFS, and I'm going to guide you through a wonderful, about 9-minute meditation to help you get to know the part that holds the wound of abandonment, and to also help you befriend the part, and to also unburden, what we call unburdening. So essentially, hopefully help transform some of the pain that it carries and integrate the part. In other words, we're going to help the part recognize that what happened in the past is not currently happening now. So we're updating it that today is the current day and trauma has stopped happening. Hopefully, right? So that's the thing with trauma, is that we have to learn that the past is firmly in the past and that we have safety now. So that is kind of step one of trauma healing. If you don't have safety now, what you're going to find is that trauma just doesn't end and that the symptoms will continue, and oftentimes at a very high level, if you are still not in a place that has enough safety for your nervous system to come out of fight or flight and for you to start working from a place of safety on the trauma wounds. So just a caveat. But I'm hoping that those who have any diagnosis of childhood trauma or borderline personality disorder will find this video helpful. We're going to be going over specific to borderline personality disorder, some of the things that are associated with this disorder in terms of parenting and childhood experiences. So hopefully that will be validating for you guys. And then we'll also talk about IFS, and really what we're trying to do here is come back to ourselves. So the part of ourselves that has always been there before any trauma occurred, like who we would be without trauma on board, right? So that's the goal here of IFS, and about learning to not self-abandon now as an adult, because that is huge. Oftentimes we don't realize we're doing it, but we oftentimes are self-abandoning in all the different ways that we do, whether it's self-criticism or self-hatred or self-harm, all the different ways as adults that certain behaviors that we might do if we have trauma that are in a way self-abandoning our adorable little wounded child parts inside. So we're going to talk about the importance of not doing that anymore. So I hope you guys find this video helpful. If you do, please leave a like below. Feel free to leave a comment. That helps me to know what you guys are finding helpful, so I know where to target videos in the future. And please definitely subscribe if you find this content helpful. I appreciate all of you. And without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so there are a number of parenting qualities that are highly associated with those with complex post-traumatic stress disorder as well as borderline personality disorder, specific to areas of loss, right? So a lot of times when I'm working with my clients with trauma, what they don't realize at first is how much loss and grief is in their system. And so loss comes in layers, right? If you're a child that did not have loving, safe parents, essentially what you're grieving is the loss of a childhood that you wished you would have had, that you deserved inherently as a worthy human being, a loss of safety, a loss of identity, a loss of just being able to know yourself and love yourself. So there's lots of different layers of loss when it comes to having a childhood with lots of trauma. So that's going to be layered in there. Also, parents who had like unpredictable parenting behaviors. Maybe sometimes they were kind of nurturing and loving, but then maybe other times they were highly erratic or abusive or neglectful. Parents who, for example, abuse substances, there's a lot of neglect associated with that, as well as volatility or like domestic violence exposure, where again, very volatile, unpredictable environment. You never knew when the parent would go off and abuse somebody. So environments like that with a lot of instability and unpredictability, as well as that neglect spectrum of just not being there whatsoever in an emotional sense and connect to that child, these are associated with borderline personality disorder as well. Emotional neglect. So I kind of mentioned that. Emotional neglect is really where like the child's inner world and who they are as a human being is just not really, not only not seen by the parent, but even if it is seen, it's like invalidated and put down and rejected. And, the child gets a deeply felt sense of being unworthy and not good enough. So that's another problematic parenting behavior that can cause this type of wound. Frequent abuse by a parent, so whether it's verbal or physical or emotional or even sexual abuse exposure, that's highly associated with borderline personality disorder. Being chronically invalidated and having your emotional worlds and needs dismissed and rejected. I mentioned that already. Your authentic self being rejected by the parent. So that is really key here, because when we're doing IFS, the whole point of IFS, when I work with my clients with trauma, is that we're attempting to find who they authentically really are before any trauma came on board, like who they would have been if they hadn't had a horrifically traumatic upbringing. That's our goal here. So if your authentic self has been rejected and dismissed and not seen by your parent, it definitely leads to the borderline personality individual's difficulty with like identity and self-worth. And they are not going to have a stable sense of identity and self-worth. It's going to fluctuate, and it's going to be highly distressing, and they're going to really struggle with the areas of like low self-worth, low self-esteem, lots of critical inner thoughts that they struggle with, which again affects emotions. So you'll see that in the emotional spectrum of really feeling deeply and intensely painful emotions and having sometimes very painful and emotional outbursts, whether at others or even at themselves, in terms of self-harm and cutting and whatnot. Harsh punitive parenting style. So this is what we call the authoritarian parenting style. There's different parenting styles. Authoritative is most highly associated with healthy outcomes for kids. That's where you have high warmth and high nurturing behaviors by a parent, but also reasonable discipline, healthy discipline that's not punitive and shaming, reasonable expectations and rules and structure, but high warmth. Authoritarian is the exact opposite. So that's really where it's very low warmth, very low nurturing, and just lots of yelling and criticizing and shaming and punishing, harsh punishments, maybe physical discipline that's excessive. And again, no safety. It's not like the child is safe to be themselves or safe to just be a child in the world. So that, authoritarian, not good. And that the child frequently felt unloved and unworthy. I think that's really the wound of abandonment, really comes down to a child feeling deeply unloved, not seen, not heard, not cared about, almost like invisible, who they authentically really are has been abandoned and rejected by the parent. That's really what this wound is. We're on to the slide about identity formation, emotional regulation. So very much what I was explaining in the prior slide, this abusive and neglectful parenting styles that we just mentioned really leads to a deep wound of shame and unworthiness. It's hard to love yourself if your parent gave you frequent messages that you were bad and not good enough, or just invisible and like they don't even care, right? So it's pretty easy to see how this wound can become something in the first place that is problematic. The child has a hard time knowing him or herself. The child's identity becomes tied to a sense of failure and not feeling good enough. A child develops low self-worth and believes him or herself not good enough. Child has a hard time with difficult emotions. So we see this very frequently in those with childhood trauma. Borderline personality disorder is also commonly thought of. When you think of somebody with BPD, you think of emotional volatility, although not all people with BPD express their traits in the same way. I actually have a video on the 4 different subtypes of BPD. If you're interested, feel free to check that out. That's on my channel. But yeah, essentially a child will not have any ability to emotionally regulate in a healthy way, because when we're tiny children, it really is our parents are the first model of where we learn not only emotions and what they mean, but also how to cope with difficult emotions, how to self-regulate, how to self-soothe. If a parent has done their job correctly, which they haven't, if you have BPD or childhood trauma or CPTSD, yeah, essentially what you've been taught a lot of times, what I commonly see in my clients, is things like emotions are bad, you keep them to yourself, or, if you make me mad, I'm going to rage and scream and terrify you. And if you feel a difficult emotion, I'm going to abandon you and leave you alone and not care about how you're feeling or punish you for having that feeling. So there's a lot of really negative messages that children get in their childhood related to emotions. And that's going to make it very hard as an adult to not only understand your own emotional world, but be able to self-soothe and calm yourself as well. So that's a goal of trauma therapy, is learning this emotional intelligence, increasing the emotional intelligence, being able to label and name and know what you're feeling, but also be able to self-soothe and self-regulate successfully. So that's something we're working on as well as the trauma therapist with clients with childhood trauma. And also the child learns abandonment, and then what I talked about earlier is recognizing all the times that we self-abandon, right? So we're feeling some sort of distress, instead of coming in and gently tuning into ourselves and being like, what's going on here? What do I need in this moment to feel better? I'm just going to be kind to myself. I'm going to let myself feel whatever I need to feel. And I'm going to maybe go watch a favorite show, go for a walk, or talk to a trusted friend, right? A lot of times those with childhood trauma, we don't do that. In fact, we don't even know how to do that. And so oftentimes there's like self-isolation or cutting or self-harm, etc. Because again, a lack of safe individuals as well to turn to when we're distressed. So this also contributes to self-abandoning. And, if you were taught early on that you didn't matter, you're not exactly going to know how to treat yourself with love and kindness. So that's something that we're learning not to do as adults. We don't need to self-abandon anymore. If we are in distress, we can be gentle and loving and compassionate with our own suffering and learn how to self-soothe and self-regulate. So that is something that we're learning how to do as well. And then lastly, every child, no matter what their background, longs for safety and connection with a parent. That's really what this is about. And at the same time, if they've been abused and traumatized, they're deeply terrified of connection with other people because people are not safe. Their child has not been safe. And people taught them that they had to fear somebody else's potential behavior or action or inaction. And so that's where you get that push-pull that the borderline individual feels of like, I deeply want safety and connection. Like who doesn't, right? But also deeply terrified of people because people have hurt them repeatedly. So that's where you'll see that push-pull that a borderline person feels, and of seeking connection and please don't abandon me, and terrified of rejection, but also deeply terrified of really wanting another person and being loved by another person. So then they'll withdraw as well. So yeah, hopefully that helps explain some of the wounds that these individuals suffer from, and also give you an idea of what we're working on when we start doing IFS. Now moving on to healing borderline personality disorder with IFS. So IFS stands for Internal Family Systems Therapy. It's a wonderful modality for working with trauma. I have many other videos on my channel specific to IFS and specific to IFS plus healing borderline personality disorder. So if you're interested in those, feel free to check them out. I got quite a few of them on my channel. So this, I just kind of wanted to go over it briefly for those who may not know, and for those who are familiar with the model or familiar with my explanation already. Maybe you've watched my other videos. Feel free, you can skip ahead if you want to the meditation, but you may still hang around too and find some new information that's still helpful here. All right, so healing borderline personality disorder is about changing the core narrative of who you are as a person. This is important. So each one of us from our childhood trauma has a story or a narrative of who we are as a person. And oftentimes that story or narrative is that we are bad and flawed and unloved and life is dangerous and why are we even here on this planet if all we're going to do is get hurt, right? That's the story of our life. And so IFS is about changing this narrative from one of being horrifically abused and unwanted and unloved to one of feeling like, okay, there's still hope. I can learn to love myself. I can find loving, safe people. I can tune into my wounded parts and be compassionate with them and watch them reduce their distress. And so there's the narrative changes from one of pain and suffering to one of hope and even finding true connection and safety in the world. Like that is still a possibility. We just don't know it when we come from some of the childhood experiences that we've had. We don't realize that that's possible. So we are changing the narrative from one of trauma and pain to one of hope and possibility and loving ourselves for the very first time. So hopefully that makes sense. We're changing how we see ourselves. Very, very important that we see ourselves in a healthy, realistic light as opposed to a very damaged lens of which we're looking at ourselves from the trauma. We're changing how we relate to our wounds, right? So many of us, if we are victims of childhood abuse and trauma, we're very, very harsh on ourselves. We're like our own worst critic. We're so mean to ourselves. So we're changing the inner voice of how we speak to ourselves. We're improving emotional intelligence, being able to know what we feel, to be able to label emotions. That helps tremendously with emotional regulation. We're recognizing that our prior wounds were not our fault. So important with trauma survivors. They come in feeling like everything's their fault and they're unlovable and unworthy and a piece of crap. And they exit therapy realizing that was all a lie and that they were always inherently worthy and lovable. And they truly see their worth for the first time. That's the goal here. And that they begin to see, their inherent worthiness as a human person. And they're also changing their faulty or their negative beliefs that are not accurate, they're not realistic, changing those trauma beliefs into healthier, more realistic beliefs. You know, again, just as I mentioned, so common to have very inaccurate beliefs based on trauma that actually kind of continue a lot of patterns of suffering in our own life. We're changing those old ones and letting them go and embracing these new wonderful thought and belief patterns that are actually more realistic and much healthier for us. Very important. We stop self-abandoning. So yeah, we're no longer self-abandoning as an adult. We are learning to be there for ourselves for the first time. I tell my clients, imagine what it would feel like if you got up in the morning, you actually felt deeply safe inside of yourself. That is like unheard of for them. They can't even imagine what that would feel like. It's possible, you know, as myself, you know, healing from childhood trauma. I can say for sure that I deeply feel safe inside of myself now. I'm not my worst enemy anymore. I deeply know my worth and I deeply feel it and I deeply love myself and I'm kind to myself and all my adorable wounded child parts are safe within me now and they know it and they trust me. And so I don't feel the emotional distress that I used to have. That's the goal here. And yeah, reparenting your inner child and your inner wounds. Very much when you are deeply safe within yourself and kind and loving to yourself, you begin to interact with your wounded parts from this very loving, nurturing, healthy parent way. It's a form of reparenting. So IFS does that as well. IFS IFS in a nutshell. So I want to just briefly go over some of the main parts of IFS to help you understand. I don't want to go in great detail because I have lots of other videos on my channel that explain this in great detail. If you're very interested in this model, feel free to check through. I got lots of good stuff on my channel about IFS in particular. So I'll just briefly go over it. So for those of you who maybe don't even know about IFS, you have some idea of what we're working on here. All right, so IFS breaks wounded parts into several categories. We have exiles, managers, and firefighters. All right, and to make it even easier to understand, exiles are the original wounds. There are like young children parts that hold all the emotional pain of our childhood. They're trapped in the past. They don't realize that we're actually safe in the present. So that's where IFS, we're updating them and bringing them to the present. That's important. And the abandonment core wound fits into an exile. So this is an original wound. Versus managers and firefighters, to give you an idea, are protectors. They're not actual exiles. They're actual protectors. And their job is to protect us from emotional pain, the pain that the exiles hold. So if that gets activated in our system, usually you find a manager kind of comes in and swoops in and is like, ooh, I don't like this. Whatever you're feeling, ooh, I don't like this. And then you'll see different behaviors that the managers and firefighters do to try to tamp down pain and make it more manageable. Healthy managers can help us manage our day-to-day life. We need healthy managers, maybe like keeping on, our day-to-day tasks kind of organized and a schedule. And, you can imagine a manager of a store or something, they're keeping everything smoothly running. So healthy managers are great. We need them. But unhealthy managers can cause a lot of pain. So even though they're attempting to help, IFS always says no part is a bad part. Their job and role is always to try to help, but the way in which they do it, sometimes it shoots us in the foot. It's not very helpful. So like an unhealthy manager, for example, would be the criticizer who's like, you can't do anything right. The manager thinks they're helping, right? Like if you would just listen and do what they say, like bad things would stop happening, but really all it does is make you feel like crap on a regular basis. So that gives you an idea of kind of a manager. They want life to run smoothly. They look after our daily functioning, but unhealthy managers can be harmful as well and cause us additional distress. Firefighters are on another level. While managers are very proactive, they're very concerned with what might happen. Firefighters are very much reactive. So some trigger has happened and we're already in distress. That's when firefighters come in. And so they are kind of like those threat detectors of the system. They jump into action to rescue you during very painful events, and they're very reactive versus proactive. And how they might do that in terms of protecting us are like substance abuse, so if you're in emotional pain and it's very, very distressing, let me grab a whole bottle of wine and chug it. Or self-harm, let me just cut and not feel. Numbness, disassociation. Suicide is the ultimate firefighter here. Let's just make the pain stop. So firefighters have very extreme kind of behaviors to try to make the pain stop, and they really shoot us in the foot. But their intention was good. They're trying to save us in the only way they know how. So again, IFS, we're teaching our parts that they don't have to protect us in the way that they are doing anymore. That no longer serves us. We want to come out of fight or flight. We want to come out of trauma and be able to live fully in the present moment as our authentic self. And so we'll talk about authentic self in the next slide. All right, authentic self, so important. This is the whole goal of IFS, is coming back to who we authentically really are as a human being without the trauma. So IFS would teach that every human person has a genuine authentic self, that who you would have been if you had not grown up in a shit show family, is what I like to say. So yeah, that's what we're trying to come back to, is finding who we authentically really are minus the trauma symptoms. So the idea with IFS is if authentic self is leading and guiding your system, you're doing really well. You're healthy, you feel good, you make good decisions, you're not emotionally dysregulated all the time, right? So authentic self has some qualities here that I've put on the slide to help you kind of know when you're in self versus apart. By the way, self never judges. Self does not judge. So if you're criticizing or judging yourself or feeling some sort of really strong negative emotion, you know you're not in self. So I always tell my clients that. Self feels very like centered, very calm, very compassionate. It has ability to clearly see both kind of the gray areas of life. It's not polarized. It has ability to kind of clearly see the gray areas. It's flexible. It has courage, curiosity, this energy of just, I want to learn. I'm not judging. I would just like to learn. Creativity, confidence. So not ego, confidence. That's realistic, healthy confidence. Humor, has ability to laugh at itself. It's playful. It's like who you would have been as a kid, right? If you weren't being traumatized, you would have been playful and curious and a cute little scientist or explorer. Yeah, you kind of get an idea of what that feels like. It's patient. It has the ability to persevere and be courageous through difficult things. So that gives you an idea of what self feels like. Parts, on the other hand, do not. They do not feel like this. They're very much, they can be quite extreme, like substance abuse or suicide, or they can be like unhealthy managers that are like avoidance and procrastination or overworking or distraction, or you can see like that. Those are some of the managers and firefighter parts here. So parts have certain jobs and roles that they're trying to reduce emotional distress, but they're not doing it in a healthy, balanced way. So yeah, self is always very wise. So we always want to guide our system from self energy. So the analogy I like to use is if you, who you are, your body is a ship in the ocean, you want a healthy captain, right? At the helm of the ship that's piloting the ship through the storms of life, whether it's clear water or water that has like a hurricane and it's whipping up and it's crazy. You want a healthy captain at the helm. You don't want a captain that is abusive in some way, shape, or form, or is abandoning you and drunk in the cabin, etc. Nah, you want a healthy captain so that your boat can get to its destination safely. So that's the idea here. We want to return to a healthy captain, our authentic self, guiding all of our little parts so that we get to our destination safely. Okay, so we're on to the part we're about ready to start the meditation, and I just wanted to go over in brief kind of what our goals are of this meditation so you kind of know why we're doing this. And if you want to come back and use this meditation in the future, feel free to you can skip right to it. I'll put chapters below. You can skip right through all the other chapters and go straight to the meditation if you want to. All right, so if you find this helpful, feel free to return and just go right to the chapter that begins the meditation. So I thought I would say that too, to hopefully help you guys if you want to reuse this meditation. All right, so our goals here are getting to know a part. In this case, we're getting to know abandonment. We want to find out abandonment's fears, what it fears. We want to find out if abandonment has any job or role in our system. Usually exiles don't. They just kind of hold all that pain. But you'd be surprised. You go with whatever intuitively comes up to you in the meditation, because that's really what's most important. Each one of our systems we may have similar parts, but sometimes they do things differently than somebody else's part, and that's okay. This is totally an intuitive process. Whatever comes up for you is totally normal and healthy. We're going to try to unburden and release some of its pain. And we want to update it with who you are now. So we're rescuing it from its time in the past where it's very much trapped and stuck. We want to rescue it and update it so that it's not stuck in the past anymore. And we want to improve its relationship with who you authentically really are, your healthy captain, right? So that's kind of the whole goal here, is to increase self-leadership, increase self-compassion, increase knowledge of wounded parts, be able to communicate with them better so that you can lead them better and help them self-soothe and regulate distress so that the system is not on fire all the time. So that's the goal of this meditation. So as we go through it, just one caveat: if you become dysregulated or distressed, that might happen because we're working with a very painful wounded part here. That's okay. Feel free to stop at any time. Feel free to take a breather if you need to take a walk, or maybe go take a warm shower to reset, or anything that kind of helps ground and soothe your system, all right? So you don't have to force yourself through this if you find it becomes really, really emotionally triggering. I'm hoping it won't be, but just in the event that it does, because we're working with trauma, sometimes that happens. Just you can stop at any time and go do something to kind of bring your nervous system back down to safety and balance. And just know that when we work with trauma, We want to work in gradual, safe baby steps so that your system doesn't flood. So if it floods at all, that can happen. It's okay. Don't beat yourself up. You come back maybe later when you feel better. You could try it again and just reassure your part. We're just going to do this in baby steps. I don't want you to flood. So yeah, we're being kind to ourselves. That's the bigger goal here. Is if you learn something about being kind to yourself and being gentle and patient with yourself, that's self energy, and that's a win. All right, let's get started. Welcome. This meditation will help you begin to befriend the part of you that holds the abandonment wound. Just as a gentle reminder, if at any time you experience emotional flooding, it is perfectly okay to stop the meditation and take a break. We are learning to be kind and to listen to our parts and to honor what they need, and that is all part of the process as well. I want you to gently take a deep breath in and let it all out. Notice any tension or areas of tightness in your body, and go ahead and gently stretch or loosely shake out any remaining tension in the body. Take another deep breath in, and again, slowly let it all out. Now, I want you to turn your attention inward and allow any thoughts or images or feelings that come to you into your awareness. Let whatever comes up for you happen without any judgment. Just notice. Can you feel this part anywhere in your body? What does it feel like? If overwhelm happens at any point, gently let the part know that you are here for it and ask it not to flood you during this meditation. If you notice that it responds, thank it for helping you. Reassure it that you are here for it and you want to become its friend. If you notice any hesitation from the part, that's normal. Sometimes parts don't trust us at first, and that's what we're working on here. Reassure it that you understand and you are trying something new so you both can feel less distressed and begin to get to know one another. Ask it if it's willing to try with you. Express appreciation for it if you notice that your abandonment part is willing to try. Focus in on the part again. Does it show up for you in any specific way? Any color or shape or image? Maybe it's kind of fuzzy and hard to tell. Maybe it's a younger version of yourself. Just go with whatever intuitively comes up for you. How long has it been there? As this part begins to talk with you, imagine sending yourself and it warmth and compassion. Let this part share its story with you in whatever way it wants to. Does it share it through images? Memories from the past? Or just feelings or sensations and emotions. Just notice. If any overwhelm begins to happen, again, gently ask the part to not flood you, and if you need to, you can ask it to step back from you just a little bit. See if that helps the overwhelm at all. And if the part responds to you, again, you can thank it for its assistance and reassure it. Express appreciation for its help. And just notice how it responds when you are kind to it. How do you feel towards this part? Notice if anything comes up other than compassion, or curiosity, or even sadness for the suffering that this part has. If anything negative comes up, you'll know that this is a different part and not self-energy. If the negative part is still there, gently ask it to step back and reassure it you will get to it later. This likely is a protector part. See if you can find self inside to work with your abandonment part. Self should feel compassionate and curious and calm, gentle, and even some sadness for what the part has gone through. How does the part feel towards you? And remember, the part may not trust you at first, and that's okay too. That's exactly why we're here, beginning to work on befriending it and getting to know it so that it can trust us later. After all, trust takes time, and it's okay if it doesn't trust you at first. And notice how it responds as you respect its boundaries. Let's get to know this part further. Does it have any job or role within your system? Does it have any fears? If it does have any job or role, what does it fear if it stops doing that job or role? If the part has any fears, see if you can send it warmth and compassion. Let the part know that you are here for it. Reassure it. Express compassion for its suffering. You can ask the part for permission to hug it or reassure it in any way that feels natural to do so, as long as your part is comfortable. Notice how this part feels as you ask it permission. Does it appreciate this? Does it help it feel safer? Just notice. And now, I want you to ask the part if it recognizes that you are an adult now and that you have the ability to protect yourself in a way that you did not have when you were a child. Is it aware that you are an adult? If it is not aware of this, I want you to begin to show the part different aspects of your adult life as it is presently. For example, imagine taking this part with you to work. Maybe show it your friends that you have now, You can imagine taking it with you as you drive about your day. Perhaps you can even show it something you are proud of. What does it think of you now? Notice if it feels a little safer, realizing that you are all grown up and can protect it now. Now, I want you to ask if it's willing to release a bit of its burden that it's been carrying. How would it like to do this? Maybe the part would like to release its burden into a gently flowing stream and watch it float away. Or maybe it would like to imagine its burden dissolving into a peaceful, soft, white light. Find a way that feels right for you and the part, and go ahead and take some time releasing the burden that both of you carry. After it's done releasing its burden, I want you to check back in with your part and see how it feels now. Notice any changes that you are feeling now as opposed to when you first started. You can thank your part for communicating with you today and let it know you are proud of its bravery and courage that it showed today. It did a great job. Let your part know it can contact you anytime it needs you. Ask it for its unique sign when it needs you in the future. Maybe it's a feeling, or a body sensation, or a thought. Reassure your part that you will check in any time it needs you. You may open your eyes now whenever you feel comfortable doing so. Gently stretch your muscles and take a deep breath in and out. You did a wonderful job today. Great job.